All right, hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series, Israel Insider. My name is Hanaf Kalam, and I will be moderating today's discussion. We are pleased to be joined today by Ashley Perry, advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office, who joins us each week to give us a brief overview of the top events currently going on in Israel. Mr. Perry will speak for 15 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A from the audience. And if you'd like to ask a question, you can do so by using the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Akhnaf, and good evening from Israel. Well, it's been a week of very strong emotions, contrasting emotions, complexity, happiness, relief, concern, worry, as I'm sure all of you know, about the three hostages, female hostages that were released earlier in the week. It really was a day you could see there was almost no one in the streets when the exchange took place, or when the handover took place. Everyone really held their breath in this country, from right to left, whether you were a supporter of the deal or not. Everybody really was just waiting for these first three to come home, and it was an extremely emotional day. We're going to have another one on Sunday. There's going to be 4 released female hostages, and as per last time, there's a big debate who it will be, who should it be, who's going to be on the list, who's going to be left behind, who's going to be next, and that's really what everyone in Israel is talking about. They'll be released on Saturday. There was some debate about that. Hamas tried to play games as they did last time, but it seems like everything's going ahead. I think Hamas got the message that they cannot play games anymore. Israel Prime Minister Netanyahu is really almost looking for an excuse to come down harder, maybe even break the deal. I don't think that will happen, but I think Hamas know that this is not something that Netanyahu is coming to easily, and we'll speak about that a little bit more. Because at the end of the day, we have 42 days. Well, now we have less than 42 days, but we have 42 days until the second and even third phase of this hostage deal, this ceasefire. And at the moment, Netanyahu faces a major quandary. He can take this to the very end and have all the hostages, living and dead, and now I think there's 93 or 94, come home. But it will mean that there's no total victory, something that Netanyahu has been touting for well over a year. The end of Hamas, clearly, if the hostage deal goes to its end, it will not be the end of Hamas. If anything, it will give them time to rearm, reform. We're already starting to see that on the ground. They're trying to show that they're still very much in power. If the 600 plus vehicles of humanitarian aid comes in, Hamas basically take most of it. They make money of it. This is how they get their power, because they're the only organization which has any sort of money. They have the food, and basically they can replenish their numbers very, very quickly, and certainly hold on to power. But more importantly, perhaps, for those who believe that Netanyahu's sole aim is to remain in power, and there are a number of Israelis who believe that, if Netanyahu does go beyond the 42 days, he loses his government, almost certainly. We saw this week with the signing or the agreement of the deal. Itamar Ben-Gvir took his party out of the government. I think there's now 63, 62 seats left in the government. Either way, if Bezalel Smotrich fulfills his promise that if the ceasefire goes on beyond the first stage and leaves the government, then basically the government no longer has a majority and could be felled within days. So that is a major problem. The other problem he has is if he breaks the ceasefire, he loses chance of redeeming 60 plus hostages. Again, many of them are no longer with us, but many of them are. And most importantly, probably at this point, he risks the ire of the new US President Donald Trump. It's clear that Donald Trump wants this deal to come to the end. He wants the hostages home. He wants the ceasefire to hold. And according to reports tonight, he's even going to sweeten the pot by connecting the fulfillment of the next phases of the ceasefire with a possible normalization with Saudi Arabia. This is the message that the Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, who was very much instrumental in getting Netanyahu to the table and getting this deal over the line, is bringing with him a message that the dangling the carrot of Saudi normalization. And according to his interview with Fox News, all the countries of the region could follow. Obviously, that's not true. Iran is not going to follow in. He mentioned by name Qatar. I don't think Qatar will be first, second, third necessarily in the normalization list, but certainly that the added potential normalization of Saudi Arabia is something that's very much something that Netanyahu has sought. It could be a way to explain away a ceasefire, that this is much greater. Perhaps it can also be connected to Iran, perhaps some sort of green light or at least an amber light. We've talked about that in the past, to attack Iran when it's at its weakest. But Netanyahu could then be voted out of office the very next day, which is a problem. That Netanyahu is known as the political magician in Israel, and you never put it past him, and you never bet against Bibi, as I like to say. But it certainly is going to be an extremely difficult trick or event for Netanyahu to try and get as much as he can while not annoying the new US president and keeping Smotrich and his government intact. We'll talk about some of the other problems he has, because it's not just on the security front. What we also saw this week is an operation in Jenin, which pretty much coincided with the ceasefire deal. The ceasefire obviously is only in Gaza. It's not related to Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. And what Israel has done is really it's launched Operation Iron Wall, starting the northern West Bank, northern Samaria in Jenin, which is probably the most problematic of all the Palestinian towns. And they've gone into the refugee camp, which is really a viper's nest. It's run largely by Islamic Jihad, and let's not forget Islamic Jihad is a Shiite organization, and it gets its funding and direction straight from Iran. Israel has gone there, it's killed tens of terrorists, it's arrested tens more. Interestingly enough, it does seem that there is some coordination with the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority police has waited outside of Jenin and arrested some of those who tried to run away as the IDF came in. Another reason that's been suggested why Israel is doing this sort of cleanup now, first of all, it obviously can free up some of its troops on the northern border in a few days. In 4 days, Israel has to be out of Lebanon according to that particular ceasefire agreement. But also they are starting to remove troops from some of the central locations in Gaza. So they do have troops available to go in and do this cleanup. But also, let's not forget, starting on Sunday, there's going to be some very heavy Palestinian prisoners, terrorists released. In the deal from last week for the three hostages, the three female hostages, most of the people released were women and children. Yes, there was a leader of the PFLP, but these are not necessarily some of the terrorists with mass blood on their hands that we are going to see this Sunday. One of them is Zubaydi. If we remember, he was one of those who managed to escape prison, and he has become quite a role model in Palestinian society. And they think, and he is a Jenin native, and they think that Israel is concerned that when he returns to Jenin, that will give quite a bit of a tailwind for the terrorist organizations. They'll celebrate it as a major victory. And so one of the reasons for this operation, Iron Wall, beginning in Jenin, but certainly will not end there, is to try and get ahead of the release of some of these big arch terrorists and try and disrupt and dismember some of the terrorist infrastructure here. Another possible reason for this is to appease his more right-wing elements, as I talked before about Bezalel Smotrich, but also some of the more right-wing elements in Likud. There are a number of them who voted against the deal, or at least abstained, and they're not to be taken for granted either. Even though the majority of Likud supported the deal, certainly the ministerial level, there are pockets of resistance who are not happy, but obviously the one to watch is Bezalel Smotrich, and that is the person that Netanyahu really has to try and appease as much as possible. We also saw the release of some more extremist settlers who had been in administrative detention. Defense Minister Israel Katz said, how can we let terrorists go, and we can't let Jewish Israelis who have been suspected of violence go as well. So that's probably also another thing that Smotrich needed to try and save face, because as I said before, Ben-Gvir already made his move. He handed in his resignation. All the ministers, I think there were 3 of them in total, in Otzma Yehudit party have handed in their resignation, and they now go back to the backbenchers. They are not even in the coalition, although they did vote with the coalition today on a number of issues. Another major event this week, which could also be associated with the Ben-Gvir resignation and Smotrich, is the resignation of Herzliya Levy, Israel's chief of staff. Now, Herzliya Levy has become a bit of a lightning rod. Obviously, as the chief of staff of the IDF, it's clear that he bears a large amount of responsibility for the failures on October 7th and perhaps even after, although, as some people have pointed out, he also deserves some of the successes and achievements of the IDF since then. But the fact is, it was always going to happen. And now, as we see that there is a ceasefire on 2 fronts, and it was felt that this was a good time. This is something that the more right-wing elements of the government, led by Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, have been calling for quite a while. They blame him. This serves Netanyahu well, because as I said, he serves as a lightning rod, and Netanyahu can make the case that the failures were the army, was the military, was the security establishment. The political level was not aware of what was going on, and they were not informed. And it's basically they're the ones who have to take responsibility. The jury's still out exactly how this will be seen, but he is going to be in his position, at least I believe, for another month or so. There's already talks about who's going to be the next chief of staff, and Yisrael Katz, defense minister, came out with 3 names. None of them were unexpected. There was a feeling that perhaps it was time to clear out some of those older, more experienced, more obvious choices for someone a little bit younger, a new generation that didn't think the same way as those who failed on October 7th. But in the end, the 3 candidates are very much from the most obvious. They're the most obvious candidates. They're very much from the security establishment. We'll have to wait and see how that goes on. Another big threat to Netanyahu continues to be the ultra-Orthodox enlistment law. This week, it really came back to the fore. It's clear that there is a push from the highest levels, from Netanyahu himself, certainly with the prodding of the ultra-Orthodox leaders of the parties in the government, to try and get some sort of law across the line. As we know, it's been held up for various reasons. One of them is the fact that the head of the Defense and Foreign Affairs Committee, which is the committee that's supposed to debate the law in the Knesset, run by Yuli Edelstein, very much wants to find something closer to equality than the Yisrael Katz principles, if you like, or law have stated. Yisrael Katz is very much trying to push something which really is very far from what most Israelis want. It basically talks about a very, very gradual increase in enlistment for ultra-Orthodox population, and only in 7 years will it reach 50% of the potential of the ultra-Orthodox youth. That is seen as a cop-out, that is seen as kicking the can down the table, even though publicly the ultra-Orthodox leaders do not accept even that minimum numbers. They probably would kick and scream, but they probably would accept it behind closed doors. But that's clearly not enough for those like Edelstein and many others. Let's not forget that this has to be passed pretty soon, because while all of these coalition issues and challenges are taking place, the budget still has not been passed, and the budget has to be passed for 2025 by the end of March, by the end of 3 months from the beginning of the year. If it doesn't, the government immediately dissolves. So it really is a strong clock on this, and a lot of things are coming together for the next couple of months. As I said, in the next few days, on the 26th, the IDF is supposed to leave Lebanon. We'll have to see what is going to happen there. There's been a lot of meetings, so we'll have to keep an eye on that situation. Has the Lebanese army done enough? Is Hezbollah completely away from the south of the country, beyond the Litani River? Certainly it's taking a beating domestically, politically. A new president, a prime minister, certainly not the ones that they wanted in Lebanon, have been appointed in the last few days. So it shows that Hezbollah's political power is waning at this point, but it remains to be seen exactly how they react to it. Obviously, last night we had a terror attack in Tel Aviv, and unfortunately it's become a relatively regular event these days. But what made last night's attack particularly unique was it was done by a US resident, someone who holds a green card, originally from Morocco, came into the country, was flagged by the immigration people at the border, at the airport, was handed over to the Shin Bet, but the Shin Bet decided that he was no threat. So there's quite a bit of investigation into that, why he was allowed into the country. Someone who then tried to murder Israelis. Thankfully, no one was killed. There were a few injured, but certainly that's going to be a bit of a topic between Israeli and American interlocutors. As we remember, Israel promised, as part of the visa waiver program, which was passed recently, that it would not make trouble for Americans coming into Israel, especially those with a Muslim and Arab background. I don't know if that's relevant to the decision making at the border, but it's something that certainly people are starting to bring up as a result of last night's attack. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ashley. Lots to cover here. I'll start with a question about a recent development. It was revealed recently that the 3 hostages that were released were being kept in UNRWA camps. Do you suppose that this means that President Trump and the international community will up the pressure on the United Nations?
Well, they already are. One of the first executive orders he signed on his first day, there was a whole slew of them. Some of them were related to Israel, and one of them was they're stopping all aid, I think all UN aid programs, or at least halting them, suspending them until they could look into them properly. Let's not forget that Trump, during his first tenure, did stop funding for UNRWA, so certainly they are worried. And in fact, he also returned sanctions on ICC employees, and from what I read today, the ICC are really are worried about this, concerned about this. Some of the sanctions, they could be arrested, I believe. Some of them, if they enter America, I think at least some of the financial sanctions, and the fact that they won't be funded by the US and perhaps some of its allies as well. So yes, so there's quite a lot to get through with those early executive orders. But it's been clear since the beginning that Hamas have used UNRWA. I'm not going to get into how much UNRWA knows. It's clear that many of them did. It's clear that some of the UNRWA employees were involved in the terrorist attacks on October 7th and beyond. We know that some of the hostages were held by UNRWA officials, and we know now that some of the hostages were held in UNRWA bases or camps. Again, they will probably deny that they knew anything about it, but there needs to be a full investigation. But at the moment, the UN Secretary General doesn't seem to be at all interested in taking part in any sort of investigation like that.
All right, thank you. Now, what effect will the resignation of Ben-Gvir and Halevi have on the security cabinet and Israel's ongoing multi-front war?
Well, I'll start with the end. The multi-front war now is pretty much only a couple of fronts. Hezbollah, there's a ceasefire there. There's a ceasefire in Gaza. Again, it could be only temporary. There's a very good chance that it will only be temporary and they could go back to war. The Houthis have basically said that while there's a ceasefire in Gaza, it will respect it. Iran is certainly not looking for any trouble at this point. They know how bad the situation is, even if they're trying to put on a brave public face. At the moment, there is terrorism coming from Judea and Samaria, and apparently from outside of the country as well, or even inside the country. So we are in a bit of a respite. How long that lasts is anybody's guess. So that's probably why Herzliya decided to resign now. Ben-Gvir is, adamantly against the hostage deal. So that was always going to happen. He said from the beginning he will resign. He wanted to try and embarrass Smotrich. Smotrich was in a bit of a difficult situation, and the negotiations between him and Netanyahu went on for a couple of days. Obviously, what was promised or not has not been revealed. Smotrich claims that he was promised that there will be a resumption of war, and if there isn't, he will resign. And that he's got at least, what is it now, 35 days or something like that, still in the government until he has to make a decision about that.
All right, thank you. Now, Eric Selkov would like to ask, Hamas looked like they are quite firmly in power. Did Israel misjudge the Hamas casualty numbers?
It depends what you call power. As I said, the international community, and some argue Israel itself, did not do enough to ensure that Hamas lost its grip. How Hamas maintained its grip throughout the war, and certainly now during the ceasefire, is it will maintain control over food, over aid, over pretty much everything. They are still the only governing body around. And let's not forget, when you have money, if you lose 20,000 terrorists, you have enough money to replenish them pretty quickly. You give 17, 18-year-old guns, you give them a few $100s, whatever it is, a month. I mean, Hamas have billions. And suddenly you've got 20,000 new soldiers. There are those in the security establishment who claim that Hamas kept one or two brigades completely away from the battle to ensure that the day after this, during the ceasefire, they have the personnel to take back the streets and maintain control. So that's what some of what we're seeing. It's clear that it will be very difficult for them to be completely 100% in control throughout the Gaza Strip. But at the moment, basically the ceasefire allows them to remain in control. To what level, we don't know. But they're the only governing power left. And as I said last week, if this ceasefire deal comes to the end, and this is the end of the war, Hamas will remain the only governing party. Now, they have asked the PA to come in to govern while they maintain military or security control. But that's really, the PA know exactly what that is. That's window dressing. And that's just to entice the international community to give the billions that would be necessary to rebuild Gaza. And we know where that money would go. It would go straight back to Hamas to rebuild, replenish, rearm, recreate some of their tunnels, etc., etc. So the PA at the moment are not interested in being that fig leaf. So Hamas really is the only game in town. When the money comes in, it's going to go pretty much, at least a certain percentage of it, straight back into Hamas's pockets.
All right, thank you. David Levine would like to ask, do you have any comment on the quote unquote gift bags that Hamas gave the three women as they left Gaza?
As part of their propaganda, they're very good at propaganda. They put out these nice videos, clever videos, but it's clear that they lost control of that particular handover, because what they did at first, for those who watched it, and all of Israel was watching every single moment that was being released by Al Jazeera, Hamas propaganda, whatever it is. So we saw they tried to create a clearing. They put a desk down, they put chairs down. They wanted this to be a little bit more controlled, a little bit more showy, to show that they're in control, to show that they're their prisoners, but now they're releasing them. But then when I wouldn't say thousands, because if you zoomed out from the particular scenes, there weren't actually that many people there, but it was enough to cause the Hamas militants their problem. As I said, it could be that these are these fresh recruits who don't really know what they're doing and they don't have that experience. So it's clear that it was getting out of control and they had to dispense with this whole sort of ceremony, and they rushed them from the Hamas pickup trucks to the Red Cross. They did give them these bags. It's another part of their sickness that they have to sort of show how great they are and how they were their guests, and they made them sign their certificates of release, and they gave them pictures from their captivity and everything. But it's part of Hamas's show for the outside world. We treat our prisoners well. I mean, it's clear that they were treated probably relatively well in the last couple of weeks. There's been a lot of talk that they were given vitamins, they were given much better food, they were treated well in the last couple of weeks. We don't know exactly yet what they went through. We know what some of the previous released hostages went through, and they were only there for 50 days, and it was traumatic enough. Israel, being a small society where everyone knows everyone, they try not to release, and the journalists and the media are very cautious about releasing some of the details. But Israelis tend to know what happened to these hostages, and I'm sure we will hear, despite the smiles, despite the gratitude for coming home, that they experience unspeakable horrors, and sadly we'll probably hear more about those in the weeks and months to come. So sending them off with these packages, these goodbye presents, is just part of the psychological terror on the one hand, and also to show the outside world that they're good people at the end of the day. And unfortunately, some people do lap that up.
All right, thank you very much. Now, Barak Korkmaz would like to ask, can you comment on Turkish-Israeli relations regarding the Kurdish issue? Do you think Israel or Turkey would like to pick a fight against the other over the Kurds?
I don't think so. I think both want what they want. Israel is not as motivated on this issue, let's put it that way, as Turkey. For Turkey, they see it as a real, I wouldn't say existential issue, but certainly an extremely important strategic issue, because as we know, the Kurdish separatist elements within Turkey, their concern is that they would join up with Syrian Kurds, perhaps Iraqi Kurds, and create this Kurdistan, and they will do anything to quell it. And the fact that they basically, the new government in Syria, basically their patrons, the other way around, they basically feel that they can put the pressure on the new Syrian government to deal with the Kurds. And in fact, that they threaten the Kurds today: if you don't lay down your arms, we will do it by force. Israel is not going to go to war for the Kurds, and let's not forget the Kurds are armed by the US. The US have a greater interest here. Israel is just trying to defend itself. But the Kurds are not a burning issue. Israel does feel a certain friendship, fraternal friendship towards the Kurds, but it's not going to go to war for them. Turkey could, and certainly elements within the Syrian government, with their threats, they could as well. But Israel is not going to get probably involved, certainly not openly, in such a battle.
All right, thank you. I think we have time for maybe one more here. Now, in exchange for the hostages in Gaza, Israel agreed to release hundreds of terrorists, including mass murderers. Is there a concern that this is just a rerun of the events that led up to October 7th?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And that's why I said about the conflicting emotions, because on the one hand, every Israeli is just delighted to see the 3 young women who came home. And then on the other hand, you see the price that is being paid, and we read the names, and many of us, I know a couple of people whose family members were killed by people who will now be released and walking the streets. It's very difficult. People remember it. I was good friends with Ari Fold, who was stabbed while he went he was going shopping not too far from where I live, and his murderer is going to be released in this deal. His name was on the list. So there is a lot of conflicting emotions, and people understand the major price that they have to pay for this. That's the big debate. It's an impossible deal. It's the devil's deal. It's Israel wants its people home, and the hostages, just because we're such a small country, because we put such a value of life, family, and all that, we're prepared to pay a very, very high price. So Israelis are going into this open-eyed. Some are against the deal, some are for the deal, but most understand that this is not a good deal. It's just, if you want to get the hostages out in total, it's probably the only deal. And on the other hand, you can say, well, yes, we've seen this before, but the people who may die in the future are nameless and faceless. The people who could be released and lives will be saved. We know their names, we know their pictures. They're everywhere in Israel. So it's a very painful, very difficult time in Israel. As I said, that's why I started this conversation tonight. It's contrasting emotions, the high, the euphoria everywhere. Sporting events, entertainment events, on the streets, everybody's talking about it. Everyone's so excited. Everyone feels that one of their own relatives was released. And then you see the pictures and you see the names of those who will be released. And you can't but think back to the Shalit deal with Sinwar's release, etc. But it's the impossible deal.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ashley. We have unfortunately reached the end of this week's podcast. I want to thank you again for taking the time to update us.
Thank you.
Of course. Now, for our viewers and listeners, please join us this Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for a podcast with John Spencer. As always, we thank you again for joining us and for your participation, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.